Welcome to Knowledge's Space. Today we'll take you on a fascinating journey through 6 pivotal events in human history: the discovery of America, the Industrial Revolution, the Fall of Constantinople, the Siege of Vienna, the French Revolution, and the Second World War. These events didn't just shape the world as we know it. They also raised intriguing questions. What if history had taken a different turn? In this video, we'll not only explore the events themselves, but also imagine an alternate reality, a second outcome where things unfolded differently. How would our world look today if Columbus had never reached America, or if Constantinople's mighty walls had held strong? Join us as we dive deep into these historical milestones and their potential alternate destinies. The Allies' victory in World War II, the unfolding of the event. In the early days of 1939, the world stood on the edge of a precipice. Nazi Germany, led by Adolf Hitler, began revealing its expansionist ambitions, sparking a global conflict that would change the course of history. The confrontation between the Axis powers and the Allies was of apocalyptic proportions. Battles raged across Europe, Africa, and the Pacific. Tens of millions of lives were lost, and a desperate struggle for the future of freedom ensued. The decisive moment came in 1944, with the Normandy landing, known as D-Day. This act of courage sealed the fate of totalitarian regimes, culminating in the Allies' victory in 1945. Conclusion: the Allies' victory created the world as we know it today, a world of human rights, international cooperation, and democracy. However, this peace came at an enormous cost: destroyed cities, devastated societies, and the onset of a new rivalry, the Cold War. What needed to happen for the event to have a different outcome? But what if the Allies had lost? What if Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan had triumphed? The Axis could have won if Germany had managed to capture Moscow during Operation Barbarossa, if Japan had completely destroyed the American fleet at Pearl Harbor, or if the Normandy landing had failed. How the world might have looked with the second outcome. In such a scenario, Europe would have been divided between Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. Racist and totalitarian ideologies would have become the norm. Imagine a world where human rights didn't exist. Instead of the United Nations, a global system of oppression dictated by Germany and Japan would have emerged. Concrete examples? V-2 rockets would have been used to continuously bombard enemy cities, and natural resources from colonies would have fueled a ruthless regime. The United States would have been reduced to an isolated or even divided power. Scientific progress? Dominated by military objectives, without the freedom of research we know today. The Industrial Revolution. The unfolding of the event. By the late 18th century, England was on the verge of a transformation that would change the world forever. The Industrial Revolution brought a series of inventions that replaced manual labor with machines. The steam engine, textile machines, and locomotives created a new economic landscape. Cities expanded, the production of goods exploded, and people's lifestyles were redefined. This was the beginning of globalization and modern capitalism. Conclusion: without the Industrial Revolution, the world as we know it today wouldn't exist. Rapid transport, mass production, and modern technologies all have their roots in this period. However, this revolution came with significant social costs. Factory work, pollution, and social inequalities were major challenges. What needed to happen for the event to have a different outcome? But what if the Industrial Revolution had never occurred? If natural resources such as coal and iron hadn't been available in sufficient quantities? If innovations like the steam engine had been banned by authorities, or if wars had blocked economic development? How the world might have looked with the second outcome. Without this revolution, the world would have remained an agrarian economy. Modern cities wouldn't exist, and international trade would have been extremely limited. Examples: locomotives and rail transport wouldn't have been invented, delaying economic progress by centuries. There would be no electricity, and modern technologies like computers or airplanes would remain distant dreams. Additionally, famine would have been far more common, and progress in medicine, science, and education would have been nearly impossible. The French Revolution. The unfolding of the event. In the summer of 1789, an entire nation rose against absolute monarchy. Inspired by Enlightenment ideas, the French Revolution was a cry for liberty, equality, and fraternity. Over the next decade, France underwent radical transformations: the abolition of the monarchy, the creation of the First Republic, and a period of terror that shook all of Europe. Conclusion. This revolution became a symbol of change and the fight for human rights. Though violent, it set a precedent that inspired other liberation movements worldwide. What needed to happen for the event to have a different outcome? But what if the French Revolution had failed? If King Louis XVI had crushed the revolt, or if external interventions by Austria and Prussia had succeeded in restoring absolute monarchy? How the world might have looked with the second outcome. Without the French Revolution, the idea of democracy would have been much weaker in Europe. Absolute monarchies would have remained dominant, and human rights would have taken much longer to become a priority. The United States would have been isolated in its fight for democracy. Revolutions in Latin America would have been less likely, and the concept of popular sovereignty would have been marginalized. The world would have continued to be dominated by aristocratic privileges and extreme social inequalities. The Discovery of America by Christopher Columbus, 1492. The unfolding of the event. In 1492, after months of navigating the uncharted waters of the Atlantic, Christopher Columbus and his crew set foot on an island in what we now call the Bahamas. Convinced they had reached India, they unknowingly opened the door to a new chapter in human history, the encounter between the Old World and the New World. This discovery led to unprecedented transformations. The Columbian Exchange introduced plants, animals, and technologies that revolutionized both Europe and the Americas. However, it also marked the beginning of a dark chapter: colonization, the destruction of indigenous cultures, and the exploitation of the New World's resources. Conclusion. The discovery of America was the catalyst for globalization and the expansion of European economic influence. However, it came at an immense cost for indigenous populations who suffered devastation from disease, war, and colonization. Despite the controversies, the modern world, with all its complexities, was born from this moment. What would have been needed for a different outcome? But what if Christopher Columbus had never reached America? What if his fleets had been sunk by storms? If Queen Isabella's sponsorship had been refused? Or if the explorers had abandoned their mission due to a lack of supplies? What the world would look like with a second outcome? If the New World had remained unexplored for several more centuries, the indigenous cultures of the Americas would have continued to develop in isolation. Civilizations such as the Aztecs, Incas, and Mayans would have had the chance to evolve without European interference. Europe would not have benefited from the American gold and silver, slowing economic and industrial development. Foods like corn, potatoes, and tomatoes, now staples in European diets, would not have been discovered. On the other hand, the Americas would not have been exposed to devastating European diseases, and global trade routes would have developed much later. The world would have remained fragmented, with globalization progressing at a slower pace. The Siege of Vienna, 1683. The unfolding of the event. In 1683, Christian Europe faced the threat of an Ottoman invasion. Sultan Mehmed IV, supported by Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa, launched a massive assault on Vienna, a key bastion of Western civilization. After months of siege, Europe's fate seemed sealed. Yet, in a critical moment, a coalition of European forces led by King John III Sobieski of Poland launched a swift counterattack, known as the Battle of Kahlenberg. The Christian victory repelled the Ottoman army and ended their expansion into Europe. Conclusion. The Siege of Vienna was a turning point in European history. Had the Ottomans won, the balance of power in the region would have shifted dramatically. Instead, the Christian forces' victory allowed for the consolidation of European states and marked the beginning of the Ottoman Empire's decline. What would have been needed for a different outcome? For the Ottomans to triumph, it would have been enough for the Christian army to arrive too late. Political divisions among European states, or a lack of resources, could have prevented the coalition's organization. Likewise, a more aggressive strategy from Kara Mustafa might have completely destroyed Vienna. What the world would look like with a second outcome. If the Ottomans had won, Central Europe would have become part of the Ottoman Empire. Islam would have spread further, and Ottoman culture would have profoundly influenced European traditions and administrations. The Habsburg capital, Vienna, would have been transformed into an Ottoman administrative centre, blending its renowned architecture with Islamic influences. The European Renaissance and Enlightenment might have been delayed, with rivalries between Christians and Muslims shaping the continent's history in a profoundly different way. The Fall of Constantinople, 1453. The unfolding of the event. In 1453, after a 2-month siege, the city of Constantinople, the last stronghold of the Byzantine Empire, fell to Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II. This victory marked the end of an era. The Ottoman Empire rose as a superpower, and Constantinople, renamed Istanbul, became the cultural and administrative centre of the Islamic world. Europe, on the other hand, found itself deprived of a barrier against Ottoman expansion. Conclusion. The fall of Constantinople accelerated the end of the Middle Ages and pushed Europeans to seek new trade routes to Asia, ultimately leading to the discovery of America. It also transformed the Ottomans into a global power, redefining the balance of power for centuries to come. What would have been needed for a different outcome? But what if the walls of Constantinople had held firm? What if the Ottoman artillery had failed to breach the fortifications, or if European states had intervened to support Byzantium? What the world would look like with a second outcome. If Byzantium had survived, the Ottoman Empire would have been weakened, delaying its advance into Europe. Constantinople would have remained a beacon of Orthodox Christianity and Greek culture. Trade routes through the Mediterranean would have continued to dominate, delaying the Western maritime explorations. Islam and Christianity would have had more clearly defined borders, and the European Renaissance might have taken a different trajectory.